Welcome, everyone. Today we have Nellie back to join us. How are you, Nellie?
Hi, Gabbi. I'm good, thanks.
That's good. So Nellie, this is our fifth interview, and Nellie is a survivor of MK Ultra, of SRA and experimentation. And she's been speaking out to show us how the networks do the things that they do to individuals and also to the masses. And it's been so interesting. We've had incredible feedback from survivors, just getting so much out of Nellie going into these memories and really explaining the mind control and how they've set these scenes up to control people and really put these themes into our lives around different ways of controlling them. And I know one of the big takeaways for me has just been realizing that these new age cults like the family and the great white brotherhood, who are sold to us as, part of ascension and part of being enlightened in so many of these new age books, are actually such a filthy organization and are so involved in mind control of individuals, but also of the masses. So just thank you so much, Nellie, for everything that you're sharing. It's just been incredible. And I just, I'm just in awe of how many memories you've been able to recollect and your way of sharing them so articulately. So thank you. And when you're ready, let's begin.
Thanks, Gabbi. Yes, I do have a bit of a filing system that they set up, and I'll get more to that later. Today, I just wanted to start with something for survivors, from what I've been through, that these organisations create the rifts to outcast survivors from their families and their friends. And it's not survivors to feel that blame, even though we do blame ourselves quite often because of all the scapegoating and everything that goes on. But I just wanted to say that, you're not to blame. It's a setup. It's really stressful, but we can survive through it and make those connections again. It just takes a lot of work. When you're outcast, there's no words. It's awful, and you're blamed for things. I know that there's many things that I am still blamed for, through these organisations and the setup that they do, when they will get you to say things that you wouldn't normally say, as a mother, as a sister. It's all a setup, and it's all done under drugging and control and repetition and all of that. So I just wanted to say that to survivors, to keep going. These organisations are so devious in how they do it, and they make a study out of psychology, family psychology, not just that, but all areas of psychology. And it's not just the family. They're well studied. They're studied in family dynamics, family psychology, extremely. They know all about it, how to push the buttons, how to get away with things, make it look like other people are doing it. It's all a setup, and they're very well versed in it. They did a lot of that at Lake Alice. They would set up little hubs with adolescents and older people and make huge group studies of them as well, and get to know the group dynamics, to see how they could make a person look like they were a loner, an outcast. It was all just a setup. And that's why they took over the running of the family. It was said to me also that the person, because they take over these organisations, they don't just create them, they also create them, but they will take over existing organisations. And it was said to me that it wasn't being run properly, and the person running it would have made them all undone. They would have come unstuck. So that's how they operate.
It's incredible hearing about them taking over the family as well, because that's been such a prominent cult network in Australia with there's many urban myths and stories that we've never been able to prove because these cases never make it to court. But there's so many murders that have happened in different states that have been attributed to the family network. So how interesting that the Great White Brotherhood just stepped in and took it over. And what you were saying about the family and the dynamics, of that psychological warfare. I think that's such an important thing for survivors to remember, because it's such a part of the healing process, is, you know, creating those boundaries with abusers so you can actually find healing within yourself. And I know a lot of the time, you know, when people are remembering, the first thing they want to do is go to an abuser and, you know, confront them with it. And, you know, that's often not the best thing to do, because is as if an abuser is going to hold that space for you and either say sorry or even admit that they've actually done those things. So it's so important to have those boundaries with family, especially when there's been, you know, this kind of generational abuse and network abuse within your family as well. So that's amazing, Nellie. Thank you for sharing that.
Is in 1997, which I'll get to more in depth later, the leaders actually said to me at a place that I was taken to some of the names of the prior people that were running it. And so I'll get to more of that later. That happened in 1997, and that was quite a significant time for me, as was 2011, but more on that later. So I was told by one leader that they're more interested in psychology than even psychiatry, saying that also psychiatry was very important to them with all the drugging and the concoctions and the cocktails and the measurements that they were studying and doing on people, but it was actually psychology that they were more interested in. And this will come out through later sessions that I'm doing, with what they could do from the micro to the macro, from studies of groups and mentality of groups to then mentality of governments and different governments in different countries, and what they could do to make one government in another country target another one through setting up certain things that would happen, and then move it from one thing to another, deeper and deeper and deeper. And that is how they operate, from the micro to the macro. And this has come out of their studies that they set up way back, way before the 60s, 70s, the 50s, the 40s, all of those things that they drew from, all of the notes, all of the files, all of the documents that they got hold of, and they can get hold of anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
It really is that just psychological warfare, that control of the human mind, isn't it? Just
and what the herd can believe, what they can get the herd to believe. And by herd, I'm talking about, they're talking about the media, the government, the police, prisons, child safety, anything like that, family, groups of friends, of a target or a target country. Yeah, anything like that.
They really are the puppet masters.
So they would see how far they could push people under duress and to see how they would behave and how groups would behave under certain conditions and drugging and all of that. So that's how they operate. And that's why they've taken over previous organizations, you know, and become stronger than the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, people like that, because they were more interested. This is why I was talking about they don't adhere to the monetary system. That's when they told me that they'd made a split quite early on from that big bloodline to doing their own way, which made sense, because the ones that were living off the fat of the land, enjoying their fancy yachts, their fancy times, their shows, their jewels, their big show of wealth, wasting time. So this is an organization that doesn't sleep, as I said before. They are thinking about their murders and their next move and what they're doing. And it was said to me by my father, century ahead of time, doing all that. They don't enjoy the life that slows them down, which is why they've got so powerful and overtaken these other organizations and made the split from that.
It's just incredible thinking of their strategy. Like you said, that it's been going on for hundreds of years, for decades, their plans.
2 centuries past, my father said.
And to really take over control within the Illuminati of these, big families like the Rothschilds, etc. And it's such an unknown group. It makes sense, that the Rothschilds, which means Red Shield, they're, the public face of the power in the world, like our politicians are. But meanwhile, the real puppet masters are these hidden groups, like completely hidden behind the scenes. And they're even, put out in the New Age, etc., as a positive thing, the Great White Brotherhood. And look at the reality.
They will also take members of other groups too and make them their own as well. So they also do that. They will also take over pre-existing organisations. They will even start their own subgroups and different cults with other people below them running those as well. So they're in a system where there's, my father talked about his God, which is a group of 3 men. It's always a trinity. Each of them would have 13 men underneath them. Those 13 men have another 13 men each under them. Those 13 men that they look after as well, have another 13 under each. So if you get the multiplication, it's millions of people now, because they've advanced. All their Delta assassins operate under certain conditions where they have to kill as many people and in as many ways as are directed in order to advance up the ladder and gain more keys into higher things that include nuclear, biological warfare, things like that. That's at the top of their game, to have their end game in sight.
Jeez.
So every one of their Delta assassins has a set amount of things that they have to do with all their men under them and their men under them and their men under them, which is why they have hundreds at each event in different roles doing this in order to advance.
It's such a huge pyramid structure of control. And so interesting that you're saying, like, at that very apex of their organization, of their network, they're using this idea of the Trinity. And it just reminds me, the cults can't create anything. They're always just inverting, God's word or what's good already out in the world and creating, a mocking of it. Like, it's like, we're just going to take that and create this, to kind of laugh at it, to really bring it down and degrade it as well.
Yes, they do. They mock everything about humanity because it's not part of their system. They don't adhere to the monetary system and all the other systems. They want to break it. And that includes women as breeders, things like that, different bloodlines, which are patriarchal, which I'll get to soon. So my father said that his God, which is the Trinity, they just sit in a computer room and push buttons. And that was said to me in 2011. And these buttons just activate what the next thing is for them all to know to do.
I wonder if that was a reference to AI as well, sitting in a room with the computers, like, to have that kind of level of monitoring and control with this network.
And that everything's set in stone. My father said in 2011, a century ahead, and it would be even more now, because that was back then. Every move, everything that they're doing for all their people, all their men. So I'm thinking maybe that my father would have many, many levels, because he said to me in 2011 that he was now the angel of death.
Oh my God.
The archangel Gabriel, all of those things. But they speak in cryptic, so that could be him referring to others as well, because they all part of a group. So they operate like pack animals. It's so cowardly, but they don't care about that. They have none of those morals of fairness or fair game or anything like that. So they will stun their prey with the drugging that they use and the concoctions, and they're meticulous, and everything is timed so that different drugging can come out as other drugging takes over, and more different, it's all different cocktails that they use, and it's all timed with accelerants and everything like that to get that full control over somebody. So they'll operate people like this to to kill, to maim, to jail somebody, to humiliate somebody. So somebody that's very high up, lots of wealth, you know, on a big wicket, who knows where they got their money from in many cases, they will bring them up to that level and have a huge fall from grace. And that will be public humiliation, maybe jail for them, because basically anybody that gets caught is not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a full
and that includes celebrities, that they will have the huge fall from grace.
Yeah.
It's all a setup. So anyone that's caught's not one of them. It's a patsy, basically. All different levels of patsies. Anyone, from the top to the bottom. And that was said to me way back in 1970.
Yeah. And we see that playing out a lot in, you know, the cases where the networks are caught in something. It's just a single person that takes the blame for these, you know, massive operations and, you know, does some jail time or whatever. But the greater part of the group, because it's obviously involved many people, like I'm thinking of cases like Ivan Milat, for example, with the backpacker murders, like that was obviously not a one-man job. And we've had one person put in prison over that. Not a good person for sure, but what about all of the other network that's been able to escape, basically?
Yeah, it was said to me in the late 70s when I was brought back from something horrific, that most people, they realised in the world, just wanted a good life, which is true. Most people will do anything not to go to jail. And it was said, unless they're gangs back then, this is way back in the late 70s, gangs or a domestic that just went too far. So that was way back then. And what they wanted to do was to get it into increments, to get the public mindset to start believing that all these things can happen. And then the public mindset would start doing it as well, because they needed to get over that barrier. A lot more stuff was happening in America back then than Australia. And when you look at Australia now, it's quite horrendous. It's catching up.
It's just that constant increase in crime and violence and, you know, the degradation of society, isn't it, by what these cults are putting out. They're normalizing, you know, lawlessness and violence in our communities, bit by bit by bit.
So the leaders actually told me that they were now the top criminal organisation and were basically running the Illuminati themselves. That's what they said. But who knows?
Yeah.
That's the fear-mongering. They're very mechanical and precise in what they do. They practice on many, many, many unknown ones. They're always methodical. They're always thinking about their next one while they're even doing it. When I was stood there to watch many, many things, it was just done so mechanically. And even on the way there, my handler, Simon, would say he was already thinking about the next one after what was about to happen and the one after that, and talking about advancing and needing to advance.
It's just such an inverted state of priorities in someone's life, isn't it? There's just no value for human life. Or
I was always told that I would be killed many, many times when I was taken to something as well, which would get my adrenaline really rushing and pumping, thinking that I was going to be killed. And then eventually, much, much later, it got to the point where I just kind of roll my eyes and just think, no, they won't do that, because that's would be putting me out of my misery. And they wanted to keep me in that whole misery state of being, you can't get out of it. You just, Groundhog Day, you're kept on being woken up, often in a car, because they get you into the car without even you knowing, under scopolamine and other cocktails, and driven to things where they would just wake you up in the car. And I would always be looking at the door handle thinking, I just wish I could just even move. Sometimes I wasn't able to move. You wouldn't even have any muscle tone. So if they suddenly braked, your whole body would come forward like that, because you weren't even able to control how you were sitting. if they suddenly wanted to really wake me up, sometimes my head would be bouncing, my whole body would be bouncing so much that I would be hitting the roof of the car, and that would even wake me up. So that was all done on purpose when I would be taken to something in that paddock. That was their way of waking me up. Yeah, my father laughed about that when I was first woken up in 2011 and said, every day has been Groundhog Day for you. And just that realization, I wasn't able to cope then. They put me back under for another couple of years after that. But that was my first glimpse, and just it went on for hours, telling me things and making me aware of things while I was stood there. And it was just one wave of horror after the next and after the next, because I was always brainwashed to forget.
Yeah. And I think that's what really stands out to me, is what's so incredible about your story, Nellie, and the way that you're able to share these memories now is, for so many survivors, it would be next to impossible to recollect, this amount of horror and crime and, horrific things that you've been involved in. For your mind to actually process this, it would have been so much. And they've obviously staggered that very carefully.
They did it in yeah, they spoke about the 6 degrees of separation, and they made it sound like when they were giving me shocks before things, and then you put the memories into a compartment from where the brain is moved with the shocks, 6 degrees either this way or 6 degrees either that way. It's called a mind mapping. And there's certain parts of the brain that they will shut down for a while that can be reactivated. And then when they started to bring this back, even in 2017, I was locked up somewhere and they had that whole place under and wheeled in the shock machine trolley and said to me, this is so that you get more memories back, and started in a straitjacket, something in my mouth to stop me biting my tongue. And then on it went. The reversal, it's called a reversal brainwashing, into opening up all those compartments that they made, and all those alters that they would activate under certain conditions to get the memories. So basically I was called an ATM machine. Information in, information out. That's how they referred to me, as an object, an ATM machine.
Wow.
That was one of my names.
How degrading as well, just to, compare a human being to a machine as well.
And to be woken up halfway through your life with the knowledge that they had basically used your whole life for that. And now you're in control of your own life. But half your life is gone. Basically, it's gone. You will never get those years back.
Yeah.
Ever. You never had a childhood.
Yeah.
You never had natural feelings for somebody and were able to have a relationship. Everything was controlled. Everything was set up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a huge learning curve when they bring you out and they don't kill you, because most people, they do that too. They will kill, unless there was another ulterior motive that they had for you to spare your life. So one thing that my father repeated in a rant to me back in 2011 was that Queen Victoria had let the Illuminati into the royal family. And he repeated this 3 times. And then he said, and the family, which was the state, Victoria, and other reasons as well, to bring things into a revealing later on,
Jeez.
to gather people around that were part of the family and bring them back into a reality now.
So very organized, isn't it? To think that, their strategies are going right up to, the level of the royal families, like the black nobility families, just shows how interconnected these networks are internationally as well.
Yeah, there's so many men. I've seen thousands of them around me, different levels of them. And I'll be speaking about a significant event later on this session that was significant because it was the first time that I saw the 13 men that were under my father at an event that I'll be speaking about later. Because with the 13, they refer them as 12 apostles and 1 Judas. And there was also discussion, I was told, that they were going to take the satanic element out of this, but that after many, many discussions, they decided to keep it in.
What do you mean by the satanic element, Nellie?
The reference to them as gods, the use of the terms apostles, right. Judas,
yeah.
Satanic killings, ritual killings that were done in front of me, things like that, where the drinking of the blood, the killing of children, babies.
Wow.
The things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So they also set up with lesser groups under them and control these groups as well. So they were discussing whether they would leave that element out of their, I don't know when, maybe decades ago, but out of their what they were doing, but they decided that no, they would keep it in for their reasons.
So interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So basically, my grandfather, he was in Egypt in the war, and my father told him that the geneticists over there were tracking him and knew him, and he was a bloodline, and they knew of that bloodline. So that's where my father came into the picture through that. So he was also born into that. So they had him way back. So there was 2 generations back on the patriarchal side that was part of that, at least.
And that's what they really want, is to have the generational abuse to make a highly programmable slave out of the children within the family. They want it to go back.
Bloodlines mean the more further back that they go, the more you're able to control the emerging generations. Yeah. It's a higher control ability to have on them because of the way that the DNA is passed down, like the monarch. That's why they bring in the whole idea of the monarch butterfly, because of the DNA being passed down without needing to know the mother, the offspring, and the chrysalis. So my grandfather never spoke about the war because he was basically under a lot of programming over there. So he was brought out to believe he was in the war, but they were doing other things during that as well with him to keep him programmed. So another thing that some of the leaders spoke to me about was the art of killing. They're very interested in art, and this also came from all the 1960s trending happenings, things like that, where people would bring art into the everyday, a lot about that. So they would bring their killings into the everyday, more into the general public, not just killing in homes, but in everyday life, many, many different ways. It was also said that they realized that people loved seeing movies about killing, even though it had that barrier. People would get really excited about seeing, well, many people, not all, would see like movies and get quite excited, especially now, like the Quentin Tarantino movies and things like that, that really take it to the extreme. And he's another one that's highly programmed to make these movies, it was told to me.
Yeah, and we've seen
like used to seeing these things, and then they bring it out with the media speaking about these horrific events and make it more into people's consciousness that horrific things are happening, no one is safe. It makes people anxious, extremely anxious, and that's what they want. That's the effect they want on people as well. Yeah. And they use a lot of repetition in the programming. For instance, under scopolamine, especially, you can be made to repeat something, and you're woken up under it, and you're so tired, and you're having to repeat something, and then you're having to do it when they bring you out the next day or days later. You're making that repetition. So they understood that they could do all these things through following the art world.
Yeah.
And bring those same little essences of the art world into their killings, and call themselves designer killers and all those horrific things. Yeah.
So interesting what you said
Change
about
the mindset of the public.
And just through the repetition that you said, Nellie, that's such, you know, a tool that we see used all the time in entertainment, especially in the media, just things constantly being repeated. So it's interesting seeing how it's done to the individual, and then it's done completely over society as well. It's such a strong, you know, tool of mind control, just that constant cycle of things coming around and around again until we're brainwashed.
And symbols and things like Disney and certain characters and all of that can be used on people to target things and make them do something that they wouldn't normally do. So often they would say things to me through this that by the time she comes out with it, it'll be too late. Everyone will hate her. And there was a duality with that, with another Julia coming out. She'll die before anyone will understand what she's saying. All those sort of things were also said. So it would really play with your mind, which is all they do. They play nonstop mind games with people. It's like you have to do something and then you're punished for it as well. These men, they have soulless eyes. They're full of menace and hatred. And when you've had 50 years of that around you all the time, there's no words for how you feel when you're looked at by these men that are so menacing looking. They are trained in that. They do acting lessons.
Wow.
I was even taken to, I think I was about 12 or 13 at the time, to a drama class in my hometown. Just all of a sudden, can't even remember how it happened. I think my mother had been told by my father to take me there. And when I walked in, the first person I saw was Stephen there, and he was running it, basically. There was a woman, and he was only a couple of years older than me. He would have only been 15. And it was very strange. There was a woman taking the acting class, yet he seemed to be the one controlling it, even at 15.
So directing
everybody out. They were practicing their acting skills because they're all put through acting school. They have to learn how to act in public and to get away with things. They walk extremely fast. They wear business suits many times, and they have to operate in public. So they have to have these acting skills and be very fierce with people at times too. Like sometimes I would be taken to something like a child care centre where they would be menacing the people there with all the children there. But that's later. So yeah, there was a lot of control that way. Also, going back a little bit more to the late 70s, Leek's imposter also left New Zealand. I didn't see him so much in New Zealand after that because the actual Selwyn Leeks was let out to go to Australia and work in psychiatric places over here.
Oh, it's just so scary thinking of that monster around, you know, vulnerable people.
So his imposter, of course, had to be around him in order to live the life, you know, as the imposter. So that happened, and that was also told to me. He was even in the car when he was making out to be Selwyn Leeks and saying things like the police are about to, you know, getting really hot on my tail. I have to get out of here soon, things like that. Yeah. So they're always mixing up your mind with things. It takes a long, long time to get through all the compartments, a long time. And I do have to stress that to survivors that are new with their memories, to sit with it for a while, because not everything is as it seems to start with. Not everything. There's just so much smoke and mirrors that they create. It takes a lot to get through everything and see it for what it is.
So true, because the mind control really has been, it's all lies. So it's firstly recovering what's happened, and then actually going, like you said, to that deeper layer to find the truth of what they were up to as well.
So even when I was only 3.5, my father told me I was already under alters, reading the newspaper at age 3.5. I could read. So this was taught to me by the programmers and through all the drugging and performance enhancing drugs that they give you even at that age. It's horrific. So I could read newspapers, it was said, at 3.5. So they will do this to people. This is how they operate. It's all in increments. Even gaining access into another country, they will even have the entire control tower monitoring everything in and out under. So they can easily gain access to any country through this.
So you're talking about at an airport, the control tower?
Have them under, be in there in the computer room with them, and they don't even know, under scopolamine. It's that easy. I've had police at times say, so your father wasn't here in 2007. You're lying. His passport says 2008. And yet he was.
Yeah.
With my mother too in 2007. And nobody knew because he had entered differently the rest of the time. See, this is the red herrings that they will throw at you as well. Many, many red herrings. I know my mother used to even get him out of my bed when I was 13, 14. And that was just a red herring for what he was doing.
Wow.
And then my twin brother said, oh, he got into my bed too when he was drunk. So it was a way of saying, well, he was just drunk.
Hang it down.
Doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, they use red herrings. They use any manipulation tool that they can use. So another time I came out to the backyard of where I was living, and I was about 11 then, or 12. Would have been only early 12, but late 11 years of age. And I was stood near an incinerator that my father had in the backyard. And in the incinerator, it had a little square cut out of the bottom. And he used to go there often and burn things that looked like photographs, if they weren't the right photographs, for evidence and things like that. And if my mother came out, he would always be very derogatory to her, tell her when she asked what he was doing, and she'd seen him burning things. She was still under to do this. This was always for my benefit. So she was always sent out to make these big utterances and outbursts, even though she was under. And he would tell her that she was nosy or a busybody, and how dare she question him, send her back inside. And this particular time, this happened again. She was sent back inside, and my father was pointing to the bottom of the incinerator and getting my little brother, my tortured brother, and I to look at it. And we saw 2 fingers that were chopped off, and there was no blood. And I remember looking at the fingers and thinking, older than a teenage, male fingers, too much hair for a female, maybe 20 or 30 years old, maybe younger, maybe 17. I couldn't really tell. And there was no blood around them. They were clean, but they were chopped off about there. And just in the inside of the square hole, outside, inside, just there. And my father was saying, look, this is what happens to you if you ever try to leave our organisation. And I have a very vague memory of being taken to a garage that was all enclosed with an older man. He looked, maybe, I couldn't really tell because I was so young, maybe late 30s, early 40s, hunched over a circular saw, and my father was getting him to actually put his fingers, and under scopolamine and hypnotics you do, put the fingers right where the circular saw would chop them off, and then chop them off. And he didn't even make a sound because of the drugging that he was under. And also a lot of the drugging, you're not even able to make a sound. Like sometimes when I was told to speak at an event, I would struggle to speak and my voice just wouldn't work, or the faintest voice would come out. It depended on the drugging. So this was always set up to make us have the shocking realization of what we were in, and then we'd be quickly taken back to our rooms and be put back under.
Just reinforcing that there's no way out. It's so awful.
Mm-hmm. And this was done constantly, whether physical violence, horror witnessing, always told it would be you, this is what would happen to you if you leave us or try to get away. Not that you could, because you are always drugged, but they would do this because it would be showing me how they work, how they operate, what they do to people, how they get away with these things. I was always brought out to be the witness of witnesses, so to speak. And we lived down a street at that age that began with, it was a Maori word, wrong, R-O-N-G, wrong, and I won't say the rest of the word. And there was always a big thing in my father's talking to me about wrong and right. Mm-hmm. And we had cousins that were the Wright brothers, his cousins, and they had apparently brutalized him as a young child. So there was always this thing about free will that they would bring in too. They would laugh, like for instance, when I was much younger, maybe 6 or 7, my father would say many cryptic things to me like, would you jump over a cliff if you were told to? And I'd look at him and think, well, no. And I'd say no and shake my head. And then he would go away laughing. And he'd say, really? And that's because they can get people to jump over a cliff. And I was taken to many of those things, especially in the 80s. Men that were deemed to be homosexual and things like that were either pushed over the cliff or made to look like they had jumped or had jumped because they were given no alternative.
Yeah. And these are all going to just look like suicides.
Mm-hmm. That's what they get their younger rookies to work on. The suicides are very easy. They're less complex. They're also done in public places. So it's like the next level of levels that they're doing with their younger men that they are programming to do these kind of things. I know that in the family home, especially at that time, my mother was always making something called, well, she was Scotch broth. And it would be like a salty kind of gruel. It was full of drugging, and it used to affect me so badly. My father would add in more stuff for my food. He would always make a show of either dishing it up when I was woken up to eat with them, which wasn't always. I was often fed with tubes down my throat, or handing it to me or telling my mum that this was my plate to eat. So he would have things that he would add to mine as well, because I was getting different from my brothers. So this is why my brothers wouldn't have the memories that I have. Often my father would be horrendous to me in front of them, and I always wonder why they were just looking like zombies and just staring straight ahead and not sticking up for me and things like that. Or he'd turn around and laugh about something in my face in front of them, and they wouldn't even react. So they were always under the opposite. And that's why I was called a fantasy object, a unicorn, all those kind of things, because I wasn't in their world, basically. Or when I was put under different drugging. Who knows what I was saying around them.
Wow.
I have no memory.
And the druggings would have really isolated you even further, because you're just losing touch with any sort of reality, as well as the people around you, because you're experiencing different things.
Different things, yeah. So my throat would often feel like I was breathing through a pinhole. My mother would tell me when I was gasping for breath in front of her and wheezing that I was putting it on. She was programmed. It's not her fault. She was programmed to do that. I do forgive her. Well, there's nothing really to forgive because it wasn't her fault. She was completely under. I'd beg to go to a doctor till I just gave up asking, because I was not able to go to a doctor then, once a little bit later, but not then. I'd even go to school, and even my apples that I would eat had pinholes in them. And when you get to the core, there was all this brown stuff like ketamine inside the apple. And I would have to eat the apple. And I would always be aware that if I just threw it in the bin, I would be watched, because they had their men all around the schools watching from houses that they had around the schools, or different vantage points. They even had their boys in the schools at times in the actual uniform when they weren't even part of the school, or were there for maybe 2 months, then pulled out, things like that. They would always mix it up to so many different things. So I would always feel watched at school. Everywhere I went, I felt watched. I never spoke about that to people. I wasn't allowed to. But if I had, people would have just put me under and in a psych ward and said she's paranoid, and this is what they do to people. They will have them diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoia, anything like that. That's how they operate. There's no way out.
You know, it's scary thinking how many people have ended up in mental institutions when they were just trying to reveal what was really going on, right, in the past. So awful.
And even I'd see my mother nodding off in the chair with my father openly grinning and laughing about it. She was drugged, so she would be so drugged that she would be nodding off, sitting up in her chair quite early in the evening, and he would be sitting in his chair, always had his chair in his superior position, openly laughing, looking at her and looking at me and laughing. And my brothers would all be sitting in a zombie state, staring at the TV. And it would make me feel so unnerved, and I would just go back to my room. I just wasn't able to cope with that. So then he would make a big show of, if I was allowed out of my room, to talk in a great way, connecting with my twin brother in the hallway, where I'd see him having a chat to him, and then he'd sneer at me or ignore me. So all of those little things were done, right down to the tiniest thing. I can remember way back before that, I was about 6 or 7, taken to a place called Foxton Beach, where my father had access to a beach house, and many awful things would happen in that beach house with other children and families brought there, and me directed to do things, be sexualized with boys and girls. They often started sexualizing me with girls as I got into my early teens, like 10, 11, 12, even 8. And then it went to sexualization with boys quite young, which I'll get to next session. And that was to prepare me for being put into brothels and hidden after a particular worldwide event that I was taken to. So they were hiding me for a while in these. So that was always many, many moves ahead. They would start things and they all have a reason that is way ahead, that something will be happening to you then. That's the reason, and multiple reasons as well. Just to break you. So this time I was taken to Foxton Beach. I remember it was one of the first times, and my father had my youngest brother and me with a bucket collecting pippies on the beach, and he was being really nice to me. And we're walking quite a way down the beach. I was wrapped up warm for once. I wasn't cold. They had me in jumpers and jackets. And my father was being nice to me and talking. And then we were collecting the pippies. And then he pointed to a house nearby and said, they're watching. They've been brought out to watch the people in there. And what they're seeing right now is a happy family, a father looking after his children. But I really hate you. They don't know that. I hate you so much. And when we go back to the beach house, you're going to find out how much I hate you. They don't know that I'm saying this right now. They just see me smiling and looking like a happy family father man, you know, a happy father with his children.
A monster.
So this was constant through my life. This is how he would act to me when my other brothers were under something else and would have no memory. And he'd do it in front of them. And I could never understand why. And this is significant because this is how these organizations operate to many, many survivors. It's soul crushing. It is so crushing when you're a child to have to deal with that.
To be treated in that manner by a primary caregiver is just, like you said, it's just beyond what a child can bear, which is obviously why, you know, the line splits and you dissociate, because it's just so awful. And the fact that it's just carried on so repetitively for you as well.
It's every time you're woken up to something. Yeah, in different increments, in different stages. Yeah. So back to when I'm 11, because I'm basically talking today from 11, 12, maybe a bit of 13. I remember a friend of mine turning up to my house and me asking if I could go out, and thinking, no, not going to be allowed out, because he always says no. But this time he said, yes, sure, you can go. And so she's gone for a bike ride to these girls' house that I knew from a tennis club that my father had tried to get the father, like, get in with the family, and the father had gone, get away from me and my girls. I don't like you, you're a creep. But he was also under to say that, so I was witnessing that. And we were taken to this house. My friend took me to this house where these girls were, and I thought, how does she even know these girls? She didn't, but she'd taken me there. And one of them eventually came to the back door, and the front door, sorry. It was a big sliding door. And she'd said that the door was broken and that they were really scared. And she looked really scared and really confused. And then she said, we're waiting for my parents to come back so we can get it fixed. It happened last night. Then she said, no, it happened yesterday. And it was really confusing. And then she said, and then another girl, her sister, came out and said, no, mum and dad are in bed asleep. And then I remember my friend saying, oh, let's go. And when I was biking away, I was thinking something really wrong's happening there. So I was taken to see that. And then I was thinking, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm about to forget, because I would always forget. But I would know that I was about to forget things that I'd just seen. And sure enough, biking away, within seconds, forgotten about it till it was brought back, or the memories. So this is how they operate. They were always getting me to see the things that they were doing and try and make sense of them. And then you couldn't make sense of them. And then, to see later, put things together. I can also remember around that time, it was after the boy that I spoke about last session, who was hit by the car that I was put into and made a quadriplegic. And I remember being woken up by my father, and he's standing really, really close to me, and he's talking in my ear, and he's got this horrendous voice, like, I can't even do it. It's like, remember that boy, like, he'd draw out his words. Yeah, that terrible, terrible accident. And he would be spitting as well, like I'd have spit coming onto my face. What was his name? And he'd say his name, and it was a family name. It was my great-great-grandfather's name. And my father would often say, I hate all my family. I want to kill you all, but I can't because I get found out, so I have to do it in increments. And he did kill a few family members.
Wow.
He did. And I'll get to that later. He had to do it slowly. But he would say to me he wanted to kill us all. So he hated him. His only family was the family. And
that worked.
God, and that they were his only family. And everything was a pretense. This family was a cover for him. So he said, I helped cause that accident. So these men that did the accident were under him. So he had penned the accident. And because when they get to a certain level, they're allowed to create what they want to create, as well as do certain elements of advancing certain types of skills.
So they're more like writing the script for these operations.
They get more input into it. So he said that he had helped cause that accident. And then he said, just remember Patrick, remember Patrick, which was the boy's name, 3 times. And he said, basically, say anything. If you say anything about us, that will happen to you. So this was always being reinforced as well. I remember after that time, around that time and after, I just completely stopped speaking to people at school. I became very withdrawn, especially by 13. There was a lot of programming that happened to me when I was 13 that I'll get to later, where I was really put under a lot more. They really upped the ante with the programming then. It was a horrendous time. I still had to make appearances at school. I was completely isolated. I was a nervous wreck. My jaw would be set. Just my head would always be pounding. It was just soul destroying. I was also put in the slow learners class at 13, so I had that stigma as well. And then the following year, when I was 14, when they were getting me into a university for a while to get me away from my family, they put me into the highest achieving class. They had me put into that. But when I was 13, I was put into the slow learning class. I was always tired. My neck was always feeling like it was broken from the shocks. I always had coat hanger, stressed shoulder line. I was very vacant in class, and teachers would often have to prompt me to get an answer. I wouldn't speak in class. I had chronic asthma. I could hardly breathe. My father often would say he was putting little pinpricks of arsenic in things, just enough, not enough to kill me, but enough to make me almost feel like I was going to die. I was very neglected. My back of my white blouse at school was stained black, completely black, as black as this. The back of the neck from never being washed. My father would wake me up in the middle of the night and spray fly spray down my throat.
Oh, God. What was that for, Nellie?
Oh, just to make me feel like I was a bug.
Oh.
That I was nothing. I was to be stepped on and swatted away and killed. It was all a mind thing. I won't say the word. I would have constant thoughts going around from programming that they were doing, that I was shit, I was nothing, everyone hates you, your mother hates you, you are ugly, you are the devil, you are disgusting, you are a whore. So they brought in the whole prostitution side then when I was around from 13. Yeah, they did all that. So I would always smell my father's cigarette breath as well when he was speaking to me, and he smoked Rothmans as well, which was a significant brand, Rothschilds, Rothmans. He would often send me, everything had a meaning. He would often send me up the road around that time. He'd make me a Milo. He was always making Milos, which had drugs in them. We'd even see the Raro. My twin brother was even programmed to open, in New Zealand, we had a thing called Raro, which was like an orange drink you could mix into water. And it would have different powders in it. So it was mixed right through. Or my twin brother would say, oh, there's a whole lot of powder there. That looks different from it. And then he'd start mixing it through. So they'd give him that job. This is how they work. They get other people to do their jobs for them. Yeah.
It's all training, isn't it? Just programming people to accept. What an isolating time for you as a child, like just with all the druggings, with all this abuse, and just, you know, feeling so separated from your family, but, you know, even at school, being unable to confide in anyone or, you know, interact or, you know, get any enjoyment out of friendships. It just would have been so hard, Nellie.
Yeah, it was breaking, and they do this on purpose. They absolutely break you. That's a time at 13 when you're really trying to find your own identity and trying to find your own way in the world. So you're robbed of that. You're not allowed to do that. They control that. They give you your identities. Many, many different identities I had, many different changes of clothes, or at that time, nothing to wear. Always having to present as being very poverty at that age as well, which makes you even more stigmatized. Yes, I had basically nothing unless I bought it myself. And even then I was programmed to buy it. And then I would be told off for that as well and yelled at. So things like that were happening. And my father was always taking us around to other families in the neighborhood. And one in particular, one time I went there, many times, like other people that I was able to hang out with. Sometimes the girls would play a game that was a sexual game. So that was also programmed. This was programming me to have sexual made up feelings for other girls and things like that. So these were the sort of setup games that they would do when you were out, and you didn't want to do them, but you knew you had to. You had to go along with whatever was presented to you. You had to get on top of it very quickly and do it, basically, because you were being watched, you were being filmed. As I said, I was told many years later that they had thousands of hours of filming for me to show their newbies how, you know, how it's done as a prototype. So one particular time I went to this girl's house on my own. I was told to go there by my father. And we're sitting in her lounge room playing Split Enz records. And she had an older brother. She had 3 or 4 older brothers. And one of them came in, he might have been about 16 or 17. And he was saying, under programming, this is all done under programming, nothing is left to chance. He was saying, what's she doing here? I don't like her here. I don't like her family. Her father's a creep. I've seen him watching us and doing things. And our parents act differently. Mum and dad act differently when he's around. I've seen him pouring drinks for everybody. And I'm just sitting there listening to all this. And I'm realizing, yes, this does happen.
True.
I'm being triggered. And he's saying, tell her to leave. I don't want her here. I don't want anything to do with her family. Her father's up to something. He's up to something. He's no good. He's up to something. And I remember looking at the window and thinking, someone's listening. Someone's out there listening. And when I had actually walked up the driveway, one of the Great White Brotherhood was directly out of the window, turned and sneered at me. And as soon as I went in, I forgot. But I was having a slight vague memory. Someone's there, just a knowing, but I didn't know what it was. I just had a feeling that we were being listened to, that boy could be in trouble for talking like that. All that was going through my mind as well. He was saying things like, when my father thinks no one's watching, he's doing things. So basically I felt a lot of shame, and he said, tell her to leave, to my friend. And she said, no, we're just playing split ends records. We're listening to split ends. And she played a record, and then eventually I still felt a bit of guilt and shame, and I just left. So that was done to me many, many times at people's houses.
It's just another form of rejection, isn't it?
You'd feel guilty because that was your father.
Yeah.
And he would often act in a really creepy way around other people, because they were all under, they wouldn't remember, but I would be the one that would be seeing that. And I didn't understand all that either at that time. No way did I understand the bigger picture at all. That took, and that was done on purpose. That would take many, many decades after. Other things would happen, like even at the school. My PE teacher had us all in the gym, and she'd set up the things where you can, what are they called? The bars.
Oh, and like gymnastics kind of thing.
For gymnastics. Yes. And right when she was talking to us, or we were a group of kids, and from the class in the school, there was one of the Great White Brotherhood went along the back wall, and she turned and looked at him, and he was looking and giving me a stare. And I'd practiced this, not to my knowledge beforehand. I'd been taken to the school out of class time in the night with the bars already set up, under performance enhancing drugs and other drugging, to actually do this thing where we had to get our wrists. And when I did it in front of the whole class, my wrist just immediately went like that, and around I went in a backwards flip when I'd never done it before. And the PE teacher said, that's it, you're in the gymnastics club. My friend that was with me, she was also, that was a setup, so that we would go to her house, and which I did. I biked to her house one day on the pretext to practice together our gymnastics. And her father was a single father. There were often single parents that I was put around. That's one of their things that they use. And he came in and gave us a juice to drink. And when I was drinking the juice, I said, this tastes awful. So it was drugged. As soon as we drunk the juice, I remember we were listening to Devo music, and we were really charged up from the drugging, doing some gymnastic things. All of a sudden, out her back door, we could have a view. We had a view of the backyard. 3 or 4 boys suddenly were marching at a huge rate towards us, came in and started to kicking us on the ground. And they do this to a lot of kids. They will come in and kick you as a control. And then we passed out, and then woke up later feeling really sore, and no memory of it already. No memory. And I remember biking home after that feeling like I wasn't even able to make it, because my body was so sore, and just thinking it was me, that I'd done it from the gymnastics. So they would always set up something to cover for what happens. So the excruciating pain continued whenever I was urinating for periods of time, especially after I got my period. The men and my father would attack the inside of my uterus and cause blood with sharpened coat hangers that were stretched out. And the reason why they do this they start quite young, as young as they can, because once a girl gets the period, there is blood. So this is what they do. It's got to cover that's her period when it's actual blood. It's so that they call us breeders. It's to attack the uterus, so that to the point that when you do get pregnant in your later years, the fetus won't adhere as well to the uterus. And this is another way of creating the mother-baby breaking of the bond. in order for certain scarring to happen, that create this. It's horrendous.
It's
So there's a
creating
disruption. They won't adhere properly.
yeah, creating that physical difficulty for you know, during the pregnancy, and it's just another attack on the family, isn't it? It's just so strategized, you know, attacking the mother and child bond first, attacking the family, and just really degrading individuals, families, and then society in that same manner.
That's why they were so interested in taking over the name, the family, as well, because it's like a mockery of the family. It's like a change up, a switch up of a family into how they're going to be operating, basically.
Yeah.
And then they would get things like my mother would suddenly burst in through the room. She'd ask me to lie back on the bed, and that she wanted to check my genital area, and she would do that in a very kind of not quite vicious, but almost vicious way, which would make me feel extremely uncomfortable and then bad, and then as if I'd done something wrong. So that started when I was 12, 13 as well. And then she would look at me and give me a funny look and then walk out. So she was programmed to do that. I have to stress that about my mother. It's not her fault. And the way they get mothers to do this is when there's other brothers and siblings, they will say, if you don't do this, worse will happen to this one, which will be the favorite one, or any of that. So they have to act like this under duress. And then they're shocked and programmed enough that they don't even know what they're doing. They're in another altar. They don't even recognize you, really. So, you know, there was never any connection between me and my mother, unfortunately. Extremely robotic. Yeah,
she really sounds
woman. She was a beautiful woman but she was just so tortured. It's awful what they did to her, definitely. And in the drama class also around this time, that Stephen, who was later Simon, was controlling, there was other young boys in that class as well, and a lot of them had the same looks. So they would have people, boys with white skin and dyed black hair, quite skinny. There was a whole lot of them as well, skinny black-haired boys that would be part of Simon's group growing up, all the same. And these were part of another group of 13, the 12 apostles and the one Judas in another layer. So these were the main ones that were around me, but then others younger and levels up were also always around me as well. Yeah, so another thing that my father set up much, much later, I think I was in my early 20s, was he took me to see one of his sisters who used to be an actress in little theatre shows, and my uncle, who she was married to. And before we went in, my father said, so-and-so, my uncle, has got a very, very special message for you. He's got something very important to tell you. And when we went in there and had our cup of tea, and they were always acting like they always did, but they were under, looking very normal, but I can pick it now, only because I've had 50 years of experience with it. Sometimes people might stare into space a little bit longer, things like that, little mannerisms that aren't quite right. Things will be said that aren't quite right. The voice tone will be changed. All sorts of little things can happen in these kind of situations. And my uncle suddenly turned and looked at me like he was programmed to do. And he said, the world is nothing but a stage, and we are just actors in it, all of us. We are just actors. So basically, he was trying to give me a message that everything in this organization is scripted, everyone is an actor, everyone has different roles, and so on and so on. So that was a strong message, but I didn't get it back then. I did not get what he was trying to say. I was just nodding, and and that would be becoming more apparent to me later on as I started to get my memories back in my mid to late 40s.
It's so interesting how, even though you weren't consciously able to grasp that, the world's a stage, we're all just characters in there, like the reference to Shakespeare at that time, it's been put into your subconscious. So, it's always there. It's always in the background, that understanding as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and the whole Shakespearean thing with boys dressed up as girls. I was promised in 2011, my mother had inherited these gold, beautifully bound, ancient Shakespeare volumes that they had suddenly got. And it was the story was that she had inherited them. It wasn't true. They had got them from somebody. And it was all the Shakespeare histories, the comedies and the tragedies. And my father ranted about that and said that they were doing the histories, going all the way back to history and their studies, creating the tragedies and creating the comedic part of that as well, the comedies. So they would mock a lot of the killings. They would stand up, they would laugh when someone was killed. It was past anything that I have words for. And they had based it on the Shakespearean volumes, and I was meant to inherit these myself. It never happened. I don't ever want to see them anyway. I don't want anything like that into my world. But yeah, that was back in 2011 that he brought those out. Another time when I was 13, a friend that had stopped being my friend when I was 12, because that often happened, friends would suddenly be programmed to stop being my friend. She suddenly invited me to her house. And I remember just feeling so bombed out in there, not knowing what was going on, woken up and I was sitting on the couch and she was there. She was just watching some old movie. I wasn't interested in it. Might have had Laurence Olivier in it. It did, by memory. And all of a sudden, a huge programmer suit, everything came out of a bedroom, said to be her mother's bedroom. She was a single mother as well. And he was saying to her, looking at me and then turning to her and saying, you will be driving her around the brothel one day soon. You'll be driving, you'll be her driver. If you don't, we will make your daughter in the brothel.
Wow.
We'll put her in instead. So you've got a choice. What's it going to be? Her or her?
Impossible choices.
Afraid that it would be me. And I remember sitting there, vaguely knowing what a brothel was at that age and just feeling horrified just because children had talked to me about it in the days leading up to that. Always things would be put into my head. Yeah. And she was later.
Wow.
Still a child, that one. So one afternoon I was woken up, I was still in bed, and my mother was telling me to hurry up, quickly get dressed, that I was being taken to see my father's team play rugby. He was captain of his school that he was a guidance counsellor at. He was captain of the boys' first 15. It was a boys' school, and my twin brother attended this school as well. So I had to get up quickly. She kept coming back till I got up. I felt horrendous in my head. I had a vague memory that I just couldn't remember the days, what I'd been doing in the days preceding that. But everything's so rushed. You have that brief thought and then you've got to do what she's saying. She's saying that my other brothers are in the car already, to really hurry. She's rushing me to get dressed quickly. I didn't want to go. I remember thinking, I don't want to go. What is it now? I don't want to go. And I had to. So I don't even remember getting dressed, but I must have. And she's saying that my twin brother's already there, that he's gone in early with my father. I don't even know what day it was. And we've got into her car. She's driven us as she's driving. She's chatting like normal in the front seat. And when we've pulled up down a street across from the school, another car of boys leering out the car, death staring me, so that I felt like crawling inside, pulled up next to us, and then suddenly did a U-turn, and then did another U-turn and parked behind us. And when my mum's told me to get out of the car, because I didn't want to move at first, thinking, who are they? Why are they looking at me like that? They were pretty scary. Older men, maybe 17 to 22, 4 of them or 5 of them in that car. A couple of them had suits on, even at that age. The rest were dressed in black, white, blue, those sort of cold colours. Walked towards me in a menacing way, and then suddenly veered to the right to where I noticed a football field was, and a lot of people on around the football field. And my mother's taking me, to follow her. And I went to where there was a big tall fence, and I'm placed there by my mother. And I remember putting my head down on the wires of the fence. Just, my neck was really hurting, feeling horrendous in my head, pounding, wondering who these men were, looking to my right. And I, at one stage, counted 10, and then I lost count, and I was thinking maybe 12, 13. So this is significant because it's the first time my father's showing me his whole hand. These are one of his whole levels that he's trained up. And these are just slightly older than Simon at that age, Stephen. So that's another level that he's trained. So these levels, there's a lot of levels. And each one at 13, it can make a lot of people, millions, by the time you get all the way down. And I noticed that my mother kept coming up to me and prodding me and getting me, like running her finger down my spine, telling me my father wants me to watch, and saying things like that my father wants me to watch the game. Why aren't I watching? And then she's going back to these men, and I'm thinking, why does she know them? And one of them is saying something in her ear, and she's coming back to me and giving me more directions, watch your father, watch your father. And I could see him, and he was around a whole lot of boys playing football, 2 teams, it looked like. There looked at least, 30 of them on the field. And he's glaring at me overtly in front of everybody. I can see a few people around the field watching, and they all look like zombies. They're just standing there. And I noticed my twin brother was standing there, and he's just looking straight ahead like this, like a zombie. And I'm thinking, there's something wrong here. And next thing, my father has, and I felt like really awful because he's given me like a look of disgust. Next thing, he's pumped the air twice with his fist, twice at least, maybe 3 times. And then he's done like a WP signal that I didn't recognize back then, but it was like the WP that you can do on your fingers. And I thought, what's that? And I would see that many, many years later, a few years ago, when another programmer was in an art gallery that I was seeing a talk by Zhao Lu from China that was very, very significant in 2019. And he did that same thing to me. Interesting, it was 2019, and I'll be getting to that later. And it just put the fear into me when he did that. It was
like a hand signal.
Yeah. A W and a P with the thing. And I thought it meant world power for a while, and it means white power.
Wow.
It means white power. So they're doing it way back then. This is in the early 80s. So I'm still only about 12 or 13 here. I think I was 13. It's my twin brother's first year at that school. We'd been split up from me being taken to the local school there. And then for the first 2 years of 11 and 12, then he was taken to the all-boys school. And next thing, my father has got the team, and it's a scrum. And in New Zealand, or in rugby, for those that don't know what a scrum is, it's when the forwards, which is about 7 or 8 of them, of both teams, come together interlocking with their heads down into a scrum, and they have to kick the ball backwards in order to get possession of the ball and kick it back to their other team members, who will then try to score the try. And a scrum comes from a penalty. So there's whistles blowing and all of that. And my father is organising the scrum, and he's saying to the boys, all of them, head up, you've got to keep your head up to start with. He's got them all eyeballing all of them. They're all being drugged. He told me this later. Head up till you get the signal, till you see the signal, and go in, you know. And then he's almost got them ready. And he's got one of the boys who happened to be the captain, had a great career ahead of him, everything, large boy. He's pegging him and he's saying, keep your head up, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And then he said to all the rest of them, now, and they all had their head down, go in you go, like they all interlocked. So this boy had, when there's a scrum, you've got manpower of so many and it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Pushing in, you're talking 16 boys, all interlocked, all go in, and his neck was up. So of course, snapped his neck.
My God.
And my father had said to him, keep his head up, keep his... And then, of course, he's on the ground, and my mother's come over from the other men who are surrounding the 13 men, 10 at least I counted. And they're all there, part of it, keeping everyone in the crowd in control, making sure that anyone else that's coming in is taken care of. And there's other layers further out and further out and further out from there as well, just keeping everything as a unit, as a controlled space. So the boy's on the ground and my mother's biting her lip and saying, we need to go now. So she'd been given the signal to take me away and driven away from that. Yeah.
Oh my God, how awful.
So I don't know when, but sometime later, my father was really elated, and it was around late morning, and we'd been brought out of the house, me and my mother, and he said, I have something to show you, come and listen. I have something to show you. He was all elated, doing his little boxing happy dance, you know, which he would do after he had done something. And he said to me to follow him. And I've tentatively followed him down the driveway. And right there there's a car pulled up, and a lady is getting out, and my father's offering to help her. And she's saying in a gruff voice, I don't want your help. Wow. I can do this myself. I'm learning. And she's opened the back door, and she's got a wheelchair out, and it's the boy, and he's a paraplegic. And so he's been helped into the wheelchair. My father's, I've walked away, I've walked back up. And my mother's seen me, and she's taken me into the garage, looking out the window, and she's telling me, oh, this could be a boyfriend for you. I think he's only 14 maybe, or something like that. And I'm looking at her thinking, what is going on? And then I can see the boy being wheeled by apparently his mother to the back of the sunroom, which was opposite where the garage was. And my mother has said that his name is such and such, and then changed it to another name. And then she's gone out of the garage, and she's speaking with my father, and I can hear him saying, you don't even know how old he is. You don't even know how old he is. And he's 15, not 14. You don't even know how old he is. So she doesn't even really know his name. I'm then brought out to stand near them, and the woman is saying, you told my son to keep his head up. She's under programming. This is all for my benefit again. You told him, he told me, and I believe him. Why would you do that? You caused this. And then she apologized to her son. She said, so-and-so, another name. Sorry, I have to say this. But she turned to my father and said, you've ruined his life, basically. And then she said to him, the boy, I love you. And my father, throughout this, keeps turning to me and laughing in front of them. He's turning away from her. Wow. And laughing. And I'm thinking, this and I just had this overwhelming feeling of hatred towards him. And I was seeing this boy in a wheelchair and having vague things that I couldn't quite remember. Something was going on, and my father was laughing. And then eventually she's wheeled him away, and my father has said, I hope your day gets better, something like that. So this kind of thing would happen. And then later he woke me up in bed, as he would do, and he was basically saying that he had been really embarrassed by the way his team had played, but it was worth it. That they were all drugged, he drugged them all, that they looked like fools, that they played like utter crap, but it was worth it in the end because he'd made that boy's neck break, and he would be like that for the rest of his life.
It's just so horrific, just the suffering that these monsters have caused. You know, such a young life, an athlete as well, to go through that. It's awful.
For the rest of his life. Yeah. So these are all certain elements of things that they have to do as part of their leveling up, advancement in this disgusting organisation. This is how they operate.
Do you think, Nellie, the way that you were taken to that game was perhaps because it was like a larger event, something bigger that your father was?
It was the biggest event that I had witnessed with all the other level of men around. It was like him showing his card strength then, that this was another level, and who knows how many levels he had before them as well, but this was like more of a rookie level, 17 to 22. They're still being shown how to do things, all of that, showing how to stalk, how to do the suicides, all of that, and then on to the bigger, more public events.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after that, my twin brother was made captain of my father's football team. And he was captain, school captain of the first 15 for a couple of years or more.
It's just heartbreaking to, you know, really look at how much suffering these networks have caused to individuals, to families, to our communities. It's just awful. And I'm so proud of you for speaking out and exposing this, because this is the only way it's going to change, is by us knowing the truth and being able to see what's happening around us and happening to our children out in the communities as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to survivors too that it is really hard to relive the memories and relive them and relive them again. But we have to. We really do. We have to help expose this. And I just wanted to also say that, you know, these organisations, they can bully us, they can rape us, they disempower us, they tell us that they're taking our souls, all of that. At the end of the day, when we're allowed to live, we break out, we're free, we learn to live with our physical injuries, and I have many, so many, every joint, broken back, multiple places that they did. The emotional scars of having to wake up every day with these memories and get out of bed, and that is often the hardest thing to do. Sometimes I went recently, a year or two, just lying in bed. I just quit. I just did not even want to live. You have to get through that. The psychological torture, that's the biggest thing, one of the biggest things, apart from the horror witnessing, which is always worse than what we've endured. We eternally have to live with the effect that this has on our psyche, all the brutal murders that we've witnessed. And all I can say is to keep gathering supportive people around you. Help heal others if you can, if you feel that you've got that strength, because some of us, we have huge amount of resources within us from what we've gone through. And I just wanted to say to survivors, keep going.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Nellie. And you are such an example of, you know, what is possible, you know, what we can do in terms of healing ourselves. And I love now how you're working in service of others, in service of other survivors, and in service of getting this truth out to our communities. And it is bloody hard, waking up and remembering. It is really hard work. It's mental, it's emotional, it's physical, and it can be really overwhelming. I think we've all, had those days remembering where it's like, I just can't face it. I can't get out of bed. But by moving into that service to others, you can really move through that, stage of denial and victimhood, and start looking at what you can create in the world and create in your own life as well. And I think, that's really the thing that I enjoy the most is, meeting survivors, preparing their stories, helping them speak out, and just seeing the change in them, like seeing them feel empowered and being able to help others. All of a sudden their life has taken on, a new meaning. And still, it's still horrible. It still should never have happened to any of us, but we can change the way it is to go forward, and we can take our lives and our minds back. So you are such a beautiful example of that, Nellie. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the hard work you go into to prepare for doing these interviews, and also recalling all this trauma is a lot, and you're doing it to help so many. So thank you again for another very, very insightful interview, and we look forward to having you back soon.
Well, thank you, Gabby. And I just wanted to end with something that I found with another beautiful young person just recently, and it was a little phrase, and it is co-create the world you desire. And I think that just sums it up for us survivors, that we are able to do that in the end. We can keep doing that. We can do the self-nurture, even though it's really hard to even get to the point of self-nurturing when our bodies and minds have taken so much that we just don't even feel like looking after ourselves. But it is important to look after ourselves and make ourselves feel good for moments in each day. When we can do that, it does make all the difference.
It really does. I love that quote. That's so beautiful. And it's all about us empowering ourselves and empowering each other as survivors as well. So thank you, Nellie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.